Over the last few months, a bigger and bigger portion of my work has been ancestor based. And by this, I don't mean necessarily worshipping the ancestors, working with them in a witch or a pagan way, although there is an element of witchiness, I think you could say, involved in it. A lot of my work really has been working with ancestral patterns and the things that we inherit from our ancestors. There are lots of ways that we can inherit behaviours, opinions, and patterns from those who have gone before. So, for example, if our parents did something a certain way, that might become our blueprint. So, we may also do it the same way, even though it may not be what we would have naturally gone to if we hadn't have been parented in that way. Or we can have a kickback reaction and we can strive to do the opposite of what our parents did. Even then, sometimes we might find ourselves promising, I will never do this thing that my parents did, and then find yourself saying the same things, doing the same things, following the same patterns. So, ancestral patterns that have come down through the ages can really affect us in even just a behavioral way. We also have a greater understanding now of epigenetics. And this, to really simplify it, means that we inherit a certain number of genes from both parents, which they inherit from both parents, etc., etc. But we inherit those either in a switched on or a switched off way. So a gene might be activated by the experiences of our grandparents, and it does seem to be more grandparent based. So, for example, if our grandparent experienced starvation, or now we could think about if our grandparent experienced heavy yo yo dieting, then we may, as individuals, carry more weight and be healthier at a bigger weight because of the experiences of our grandparents. If our grandparents started smoking or drinking before the age of puberty, so around sort of 14, 15, then we may be more likely to smoke or drink ourselves. If our grandparent experienced trauma that they didn't process fully in their lives, then we may be born with lower cortisol levels and we may manage our trauma and our anxiety in a different way. So the experiences of our grandparents and the experiences of our ancestors do play a significant role in our genetic makeup as well as just our behavior. And this is before we even begin to start thinking about the spiritual and religious beliefs around what we inherit from our ancestors. So things like, for example, the idea of something lasting 7 generations, or the idea of a burden carried from one ancestor down, or the idea of the sharing of trauma. So carrying a piece of trauma for our parent that we feel is too big a load for them to carry on their own. Or even the idea of ancestral memories being passed down. So us understanding the memories and being activated by the memories of our ancestors. So if an ancestor had a traumatic experience with a boat, we may be afraid to be on a boat. If they drowned, we may be afraid of water, etc., etc. So there are lots of theories that show how our ancestors and the lives that they lived can impact our present. And moving away from the spiritual idea of ancestral memories, in a more mundane psychological way, we can look at the way that the stories we hear about our ancestors, the things that we're told, either straight to us, or the things that we hear and the things that we absorb as children when we hear our parents and our grandparents talking about their experiences, talking about their families' experiences and their memories. All of these things can have an impact on the way that we process these ancestral stories and the way that we live our lives. So, how can we begin to work with these ancestral patterns and with these ancestral theories within hypnosis and within hypnotherapy? Well, a lot of hypnotherapy really revolves around that psychodynamic belief that when we take something that's unknown, something that's unseen, and we make it seen and we make it visible, then we're more aware of it and we're less likely to unconsciously follow it and act it out. So, making ourselves aware of something that's inside us that we weren't already aware of means that we have a lot more, I guess, control over how that manifests. So this is something that Freud talks about in terms of his idea of the conscious and the up and the unconscious. And Freud's unconscious basically was, he worked with clients to look at the reasons that they did things, usually based around childhood. And he looked at, if we make the client aware of these things, then they have more conscious understanding and they're more able to work with that. So they're able to say, I don't want to do this anymore. Or I'd like to do this, but I'd like to do this in a conscious way. And this is also reflected in the work of Jung and his shadow self, and the way that we can make the shadow self visible to us, and then we can make it an important tool and a benefit to our lives. So when we work with ancestral patterns, we're going back not just to our childhoods and our babyhoods, we're going back further and we're understanding how the experiences of our ancestors and what we inherit from them are also unseen shadow parts of us. And by making them seen, by acknowledging and understanding them, we can then harness them and we can choose to either manifest them or we can choose to transform them into something that works better for us. As a hypnotherapist, when I work with trauma, I work with processing and releasing the stuck energy around that trauma. So when we work with ancestors, what we're doing is we're taking that further back. So we're not just looking at processing the trauma in our own lives, which causes us to have cortisol spikes, which causes us to have nervous system reactions, which causes these anxieties and some other health problems. We're looking at taking that further back. And we're looking at maybe our ancestor didn't have the opportunity to process that trauma, and they've handed it down to us as unprocessed trauma, so that then we hold that within ourselves. So we may not be able to process the trauma for our ancestors. We may not be able to take away the experience that they had. But what we can do is we can heal it within ourselves. We can heal what we've inherited of that trauma background. And one way that I love to describe this is, for myself, as a neurospicy person, I have probably quite neurospicy ancestors as well. I can definitely suggest that my parents probably weren't neurotypical. And within their house, as I was growing up, there were lots of boxes of things. So if you've ever kind of lived with neurospicy people, you'll know that sometimes the tidying up is a mad panic before someone comes round. So you get a box or a bag, you throw everything in it, and then you put that box or bag somewhere else. And for my parents, it was very much the garage. But when I started going through their things after their death, I realized that the doom boxes, as they're called, and they're called doom because it's don't organize, only move. And that these doom boxes that they had in their garage also included doom boxes from other people's houses. So when both my grandmothers died, their things were either put into a doom box and put in the garage, or their doom boxes were carried through into my parents' garage with kind of various generations taking a few bits out but leaving everything as it was. So I have these doom boxes inherited from grandparents, great grandparents, great aunts, cousins of my grandmother. So these doom boxes that now I have in my garage, unsorted, maybe I'll have a look at them every now and again, but they stay in my garage taking up room. And that's room that I could use for other things. And if I sorted them all out and tidied them, then I could still have the beautiful things that I've been handed down. And I could still hold on to these things that are in these boxes that are such an important part of history, but without them being an unsorted mess taking up room. And this is really what ancestral work does. We look at these boxes that we've inherited from all of these ancestors moving down. We look at these boxes and we say, okay, now I'm going to spend some time looking at what's in here. I'm going to take away anything that's rotten and that might make everything else I own in that garage rotten. I can take anything that needs a really good clean and clean it. But I can also take things that are, for all sort of intents now, useless because we don't live that life, and I can tidy them, I can shine them up, and I can repurpose them so that they can become something that we do use now. And this is what we do with ancestral work. So what we do is we look at what we've inherited and we say, I don't need to be right now afraid of World War II bombs dropping from the sky. So when I hear a siren, my nervous system doesn't need to react to that siren. So I can let that go. I can heal that. But this beautiful, beautiful embroidery and the skill to embroider is actually something that I'd like to hold on to. And I would like to bring this skill into my own life. I would like to bring this creativity either to be able to embroider myself and to create great, beautiful embroidery, or I'd like to repurpose this into something that creates another form of creativity, maybe digital imaging or photography that's more useful to my life. But sometimes those doom boxes that we've inherited from our ancestors, those things that have come straight down to us, unsorted and uncleansed, can either have a really terrible smell, or maybe they're ringing and they're a source of noise and there's an alarm ringing within them. And that's when we maybe are aware of something. So we may be aware of a smell or a sound or an energy. So we may be aware that there's something that's blocking us in our lives. And that may be something that we understand how it's manifesting. So we may say, I have extreme anxiety and I'd like to understand where that comes from. We may say, I have a fear of spiders, and I'd like to understand where that came from. We may find that we have a difficult relationship with a parent or a sibling, or that may have merged and changed, and we may find it difficult to work with authority, or we may find it difficult to relate to somebody else within our lives. So recognizing that there is an issue, even though we may not be exactly aware of what that issue is, means that we have the opportunity to then work with it. We have the opportunity to start investigating. And that's where hypnosis and we're working in a very mindful way with the ancestors can help us remove this blockage, this tiredness, this stuckness, can help us maybe work with the equivalent of the bad smell in the garage or the noise that we don't know where it's coming from. And this is how specifically looking at doing ancestor work can make a big difference to our current lives. And we can do this exploration in a number of different ways. So I run a ancestor course once a year where I do this work, and we spend 4 weeks really looking at what's happening in our ancestry and how it affects us. We can also do just straight hypnotherapy work. So we can simply just use trance to then explore these different paths and patterns. But what I've been doing recently is I've been using a combination of really kind of spiritual exploration along with the hypnosis in order to explore and understand what's happening, to explore what you'd like to explore, and then to do the work to heal and release it. So what I would do is I would spend time with you, and we can use various different tools. So we can simply use just memory, and we can sit and have a conversation about what the issue presenting is, and then you can talk through and see where that may have come from. We can use divination cards, so we can use cards or runes or something as a tool in order to get that kind of not quite everyday life aspect through, that kind of prophecy, divination, otherworldly element to understand. I have some ancestor dolls that I use now to look and explore, and this is something that we can work with as well. Or you can bring your old photographs or elements, objects that your ancestors have owned to the session. Either if you're doing an online session, which is much easier because you can scatter all your precious things around you, or even in an in-person session, you can bring these photographs and we can sit and we can work with these photographs, and we can work with these energies to explore what's happening, what's going on, what's happening within you in regards to what you've inherited from your ancestors. And then we can use the trance work and the hypnosis to then release and to heal that blockage, and we can process that energy so that then everything runs and feels a lot smoother. And every ancestor session will be very slightly different to another. It's very much guided by the energies, it's guided by what needs to be done. And you may come to me with a really specific thing you want to work on. So you may come to me and say, I have this specific issue that I know has come from this ancestor, and I'd like to work on it. And we can work on understanding the role that had in their life and where they either inherited or picked it up from. Or you can come with something really vague. So you can come with something as vague as, I am not sleeping through the night and I've always woken at, say, 2 or 3 in the morning, and I feel that this may not have a psychological reason, it might have a ancestral reason. Or you can come with, I have a sense of anxiety. Or you can come with, depression runs in my family and I'd like to explore that a bit more. So it's taking, or, my mother didn't have a good relationship with her mother, and I feel that I don't have a good relationship with her, but I would like to. So we can look at that. So you don't have to necessarily know really in detail what ancestors affected by this. You can simply come with a symptom or something you'd like to explore, and then we can work with the ancestry to explore that. And the thing about ancestor work is that it doesn't have really a beginning, a middle, or an end. There's no set amount of sessions that you would need to have. You can just have one session to explore one thing, or you can explore something different each time. And you can see how long it takes the rest of your mind to work through this. So you may find that you want to work on a couple of things and maybe do like a couple of weeks in a row and then maybe take a month off. You may want to work every month. You may choose to have one session or to work once a year, or you may have that one session and go, actually, I know what I'm doing now, so I'm just going to work with my own ancestry and I can sit and do my own work. So there's no real idea about how long it might be or how many sessions you may need. It's simply, is this something that I feel would be beneficial to me, and how would this be beneficial? And the thing about ancestor work is that it genuinely can go on forever because we have infinite ancestors. So there may never be a time when you say, okay, I'm finished. It's simply a case of exploring what you feel driven to explore when you feel driven to explore it. So these sessions are slightly longer than your average hypnosis session would be because they're not just hypnosis. We've got that exploration stage at the beginning. And the trance is really just the work. So we do the exploration and then we do the work. So they take around, I would say, 90 minutes. And I find them really, really inspirational and also fascinating to work with. So I prefer to work in this ancestor way than I do working with things like, for example, past life regression. So I love doing past life regressions, but this ancestral work, this work where we're really looking at the gifts that your ancestors have passed down and looking at that relationship, that flow of energy, that's absolutely wonderful for me to be able to work with. And it's been really inspirational and powerful for the clients that I've worked with in this way as well.